Okay, so now we are going to focus on innovation in the field of revenue generation for cultural institutions. So we have from 11 to noon a roundtable about innovation in fundraising and in the relationship with companies and through digital fundraising, so until noon. And after that, from noon to 12:45, we will have a topic about a roundtable about innovation in the retail sector. So for the topic innovative fundraising, we have with us today MASHA from La Collection. She's the curatorial director and art advisor of La Collection. Lucy Littlewood, she's the Director of Development from the Museum of the Home in London, coming from London for Museum Connection. Thank you so much. We have Simon Medina, who is the Head of Fundraising at the Musée des Confluences in Lyon, coming also from Lyon for the conference. And we will be having Gaële de MEDEIROS, who is the Director of Development and International Relationships of the Centre Pompidou. She's stuck in a cab. She will be here in a few minutes. And I can't imagine someone more suitable for this, for the moderation of this roundtable than Sarah HUGOUNENQ, independent journalist, teacher, doctorant, how do you say? She's preparing a PhD, specializing in funding of cultural institutions and cultural heritage. So, Sarah, over to you.
Thank you so much, Annabelle. Well, welcome to everybody. So we're speaking about innovative fundraising in museums. Because in few years, museums have changed, have upscaled. They play a new and major role in diplomacy, and country and town planning, and politic influence, and attracting tourism. And museums have changed, so do their economic models. To fulfill their new missions, they are facing a major need of greater financing. Meanwhile, public support is declining. The first answer to that situation has been to ask a major support to the private sectors through philanthropy. Meeting a great impact and carried to an extreme, this solution reached the end of a cycle. With the transformation of the social role, museums seek for new hybrid fundraising models at the crossroads of physical and digital, of public and private sectors, of financial and cultural issues. To better apprehend this new balance between economy and cultural or social missions, you will hear 4 innovative strategies implemented in French and British museums, dealing not only with financial sustainability, but with economic resilience on the long term. So, you will heard about from Simon Medina in the Musée des Confluences in Lyon. You will explain the new dialogue your institution is implementing with the companies. Then we will cross the channel to go to London with Lucy Littlewood, Commercial and Campaigns Director at the Museum of the Home in London, where fundraising campaigns goes with innovative partnership with the social sector. Then MASKINA, Curator, Director and Art Advisor at La Collection, will show how her company is promoting digital fundraising through NFTs in partnership with the British Museum. And at the end, when she will arrive, Gaële de MEDEIROS in Centre Pompidou, with the example of the École Pro of training for a company from the institution and its endowment fund acceleration. So please, Simon Medina, I give you the stage.
Merci beaucoup, Sarah. Bonjour à
Thank you very much, Sarah. Hello, everyone. I hope everyone can hear me properly. My name is Simon Medina. I work with the Museum of the Confluences in Lyon. I'm going to talk about the experiences that we've carried out in order to get the museum to enter corporations. What motivated us, one of our satisfactions, was to try to reverse our relationship with corporations, starting with our own needs and a catalog of projects that we needed to finance. We tried to look at what we could contribute to companies as a museum and how we could try to better understand their expectations and to answer them and contribute solutions. The second aspect is we've always considered that companies, part of the publics, when we build an offer for a public of school children or families or internationals, we have really thought about targeting our offer to the professional public. This means several things. The first one is that we decorrelate the relationship with the company from the only transactional relationship, the only financial relationship. When you talk to a public, this means that you have a voice and you need to find a new public, and a museum can have an echo because of its collections, but also because of its sponsors. It gives you credibility in your professional public. And when you work with the largest employers in your territories, it allows you to find new publics who come to see you as you go to them. And this wouldn't have particularly been the case. It's outside of the professional framework. It's important to insist on this. And once you have this as a starter, of course, we've built an offer with classic components like the privatization of space, and we wanted to give ourselves the freedom to go further, the freedom to experiment, to invent new things. And for this, we've brought together some companies that we were confident in, and they were close to the museum. We put them around the table. We did several sequences of work, and we said, what can the museum contribute that is original, that can be privileged? And by broaching these companies, we had a feeling that the sponsoring was moving. We're no longer talking about external communication, but we're focusing more and more internally to federate. And this is something that interested as well, because we're looking at the company as a social player, and we support their social action with their employees, but also with an ecosystem of nonprofits that it can support. And we suggest to these companies that the idea, and we had looked at the small nomad gallery of the Louvre Museum, and we thought, we could do that as well. And we've seen bone, ceramics, stone collections that could be easy to move around and to install within the company. And a company told us, well, that's a great idea, but we want to help you to implement this, and we want to be the first company in Lyon to experiment this type of project. So I go back to the concrete example of this first exhibition within a company. It was organized with Boehringer Ingelheim, which is a pharmaceutical lab. And when we discussed this project, we were trying to put a skeleton of a whale inside of the Museum of the Confluence. It is absolutely a flagship of our collection, and it wasn't shown in the Museum of the Confluences. It was presented in the previous museums that we are the heirs of, and right away it just really talked to them, because it really delights people, and it reminds them of visiting museums with their parents. And we're talking about also the disappearance of marine mammals, and we're talking about the conservation of species. So before we put the whale in the museum, we'll put it inside your new headquarters, except a whale is huge. It's about 17 to 18 meters. It's hard to set up in a company. So we've changed the scale, and then we suggested to have a smaller marine mammal, but that's really how it happened. I know it's funny, but the director of the site said it's either the company cafeteria or the whale. You've got a choice. So we said they could have an object that is smaller. We had a smaller marine mammal that is 6 or 7 meters long, and the new building was called Boréal, and the narval is also an object from the Museum of the Confluence. It comes out of our collection of natural history, and we had a specimen that really triggers the imagination. When you think about them, you've got this huge tooth that inspired the myth of the unicorn, and it tells us to have all sorts of stories spun around it. And it helped us to really talk about how the company wanted to be involved in conservation. We had a real exhibition with a scenography and a narrative, and we are there to tell a story. That's what we do in the museum. We're not there to serve the discourse of the company. We're there to inspire it. We have carte blanche for the project. We just have a little bit of context that explains to us why the museum and the company work together and why the idea of bringing something from the collection of the museum to the company. Except we work this like a normal exhibition. It's not 750 meters squared. It's much smaller, but it was an immediate success. It is in a context where there was a merger for the company. They were purchased, and we're changing this. And it's a difficult context, and it became a federating element where people are meeting there. There were competitions organized to give him a name. So there was a really strong relationship that was built around this project, and it was a starting point for us of what became something important in our approach to them. So we're trying to have this with our main sponsors for those who want it. We have wrapped up the third one that was stopped in March. We did 2 with that lab, a third one in another flagship in Lyon called Biomérieux, where we're going to set up a very small Allosaurus skeleton, which is like a small T-Rex, and it's going to have a lot of impact for their employees. What is interesting is that we remain within the framework of sponsoring, but we have looked at the counterparts in project mode. So we have focused the attention of the company from the project that they're funding by giving us unallocated sponsoring, because that's great for us. We can do what we want with it, and then we can fully focus on the projects that we do together as a counterpart of the funding that we get from them. And it allows us to get sponsored who never would have come to support a culture program with us, because we're meeting an expectation. We're part of their CSR policy with their employees or the nonprofits that they support. So it's unallocated fund. And we don't really have an interference issue, because we're helping them build their company project. And I think it's really interesting in the relationship that we have with these corporations. If I have a couple of minutes, I'd like to wrap up on the pros and cons and the limits of these types of projects. You saw that the advantage meant that we create an in-depth.
Je disais une relation en profondeur.
So I was saying we have an in-depth relationship, and we break the ice. We bring the museum and the company together. We involve our interlocutors at every stage of the project, so they're really jumping in. We develop everything. There's something that is intimate that is being created, but it also breaks the barrier on our side because of all of the museums are involved in this. So we're thinking behind this company that we can think that is good or bad. You have people that can contribute making the museum more accessible. And the other advantage, it can help us to trickle things down to the message of the corporation, to the media that is tracking the project, to conferences and mediation that we can build around the project to really create an in-depth link with the company. And I'll stop with the points of attention. These projects take a lot of time and energy. It's worth it when you look at them with large companies, but you also need to have less ambitious projects that are more visible, having I'm thinking it can be workshops, it can be nomad displays. They will have the same impact within the company. In this approach, we should also not be mistaken as to our target. We are supporting the projects of the company, but we don't want to become a service provider of the company. So what is part of our strength, what is part of our scientific rigor to be a confidence company when in the era of fake news, we want to keep our identity and stick to who we are. We want to tell stories within the company to be a source of inspiration, of course, but not just be serving the discourse of the company. And that would be our point of attention.
Experimentation. So we'll continue with a French example with le Centre Pompidou. And I give the floor to Gaële de MEDEIROS.
Merci beaucoup, Sarah.
Thank you.
Pompidou en matière de ressources propres, partenariats.
We have our own funds and we have innovative partnerships. And what I was saying in the intro, and as I was preparing this talk, there are fundraising issues, patronage issues, sponsors. What we can cover that isn't necessarily part of philanthropy, and what a museum or cultural institution can do in terms of fundraising with as regards donors, individuals, companies, without necessarily being in the rationale of, Simon was saying, as a service, a provision of service. So there's some innovative systems and innovative schemes that are sort of off the beaten path. So the Pompidou Center's history and DNA and purpose when it was created in 1977 was in a way to go off the beaten path, actually, and have a transdisciplinary, multidisciplinary focus, which is really the whole nature of the project. And this is in partnership with what we're able to present today as innovative offers in relation to companies and institutions. I think it all goes back to the original DNA, and I think we capitalize on that. Some concrete examples we're developing and have been over the past few years. 2017 was an important time for us where we came up with new schemes, and that really has to do with the interdisciplinarity that makes up who we are. And we see this often in publications. And first of all, in 2017, we created a sort of platform invented by our division of public relations. It's called Develop Pro. And so it's a bit different in the way that it's used, the way it functions as regards companies. But it in the museum field, it's a substantially differentiating different approach. And we have seminars, and there's CSR, and there's governance, and working with other companies. But bringing companies in to see the artwork, or bringing the artwork to them, and this can be built up jointly. We can roll that out, say, over a morning or over longer cycles. There's training, there's seminars for managers, executive management, or more broadly speaking, on, say, innovation, confidence, quite diverse, in fact. So our idea is to say that looking at artists, meeting artwork, it's an expression we hear. It's like stepping aside. It's renewing the way people, it's a new way of looking at things, and it can inspire employees. So there have been a lot of examples of this, and it's quite successful. We're increasingly doing these, and I think we were a bit ahead of the game on this. Well, then came COVID. And it sort of upended everything we were doing, and it pushed us to reinvent things, and the relationship that we have with artwork and the presence of artwork and the actual physical confrontation between art and artworks and even artists, all of that had to be rethought. So we're looking at that. There's little tension, though, with the digital formats developing, but I think this has just maybe intensified the need to really meet, really see physically paintings and really meet with the actual artists. So I don't know that it's really a mediation tool, but working with companies, in fact, it's not really just mediation. I think it's an invention, as it were, with contemporary artists. It's a scheme where you have interaction that's innovative with employees for the companies, and, well, they're artists in a certain space, and we call this École Pro, and that's part of our collections. It's inside the collections. It's a space that was laid out there by designers. It's very innovative in its design itself. It's a space that sort of just rolls out with like a trap door that you open up. Like I invite you to check it out if you haven't seen it yet. With the new center being built, it's only another 2 years that you can actually see it. So, but we have other activities that are a bit more like patronage, and you talked about that, I think. But we have the Acceleration Foundation, 2017, and it really bloomed in 2019. And we want to have an original connection with it with companies through artists in residence. So these are artists, say, based on a specific topic or theme, say, based on a variable duration, and they would go into a company to create artwork, create connections with what's going on. So there's a whole sort of, it's a sort of triangulation in connection with other people to encounter other people. So there's a group of patrons. It's a specifically legal type of fund, and the idea is to use it for the center's functioning. And so the money there has a specific use for it. There's own governance. There's a board of directors for the fund. There's a president of the fund, and working with the Center of Pompidou. Artists in residence, that the artwork that they create then is part of our collection. So then the idea is to make those available for the public, and then that enables us to, at the National Collection, we can have contemporary artists in our collections, and they're not necessarily emerging artists, but they're already confirmed artists. You probably know that acquiring artwork for national museums is particularly challenging, and that's an understatement. So if we look at market price, and I'm not just talking about artwork, but masterpieces, but contemporary work, prices are just so high. And if you look at the history of the Pompidou collection, it was built up through donations. Essentially, we have an annual budget allocated, but allocated to artists in this program that create the artwork that then becomes a part of the program. So we designate the artists that we are interested in having their artwork in our collection, but it's original. It's an original way of acquiring this through patronage, through corporate patronage. So it's a way of getting people interested, getting companies interested. We have between 5 and 10. We had our initial season between 2018 and 2019, and then the COVID episode, of course, we were kicking off a new season that, of course, got interrupted. And so we didn't think we weren't sure when that was going to kick off again. We didn't think we were going to do this again, but now we have 5 companies who came to us and are interested in this program, different from the previous ones, with the exception of the company behind the initiatives, MEDEIROS, and their communications consulting company and involved in lobbying. We have 2 banks. So an alliance of 5 companies kicking off again. And I've got other things to say, but I think we all have a short amount of time to speak. Yes, we can talk about the benefits and the limits of that in just a minute.
2 initiatives. Sorry, I have the return. It's difficult to speak with that. Please, Lucy Littlewood, for the museum in London, Museum of the Home in London.
Is that working? Is that working? Getting money out of people is really hard, and I think we can probably all in the room acknowledge that. Asking individuals for money, whether it's for a €30 a year friends scheme or a company for a multi-million pound year-on-year deal, it's really, really hard. And I think we're all acknowledging that. For me, what's really important is, understanding that companies are moving, I feel, at a much more rapid rate than generally the sector is. And how do we keep up with them? And how do we do this in an innovative way? We've heard some really interesting examples there. For me, it's all about understanding them. And Simon, you asked them, and I think that's so important. Understanding why, whether they're individual, why should they part with their money? Why do you matter? Why are we important? And really understanding what's in it for them. And it used to be a great party and their logo on a board, and it's just not anymore. And they are, as we know, so much more concerned with their CSR, their fundamentals, their principles, as is their audience. And we've all seen, I'm sure, the controversy in the UK with pharmaceuticals and with petroleum companies. It's really important that we understand not only the company and the individual, but also their own clients, their own customers as well. So that leads me on to my story. The museum that I work for, the Museum of the Home in London, has been a museum for about 100 years. Prior to a great big refurb and a rebrand, it was essentially a museum of furniture history and a museum of the domestic interior. So who cares about that? People that care about those things. So in fact, there wasn't much fundraising going on in those days. It was government funded. But actually the ask, had I been in charge then, my pool of donors, people that are interested in those subjects. We've moved on to be the Museum of the Home. We reopened in May, and our vision is to try to reveal and rethink how we all live so that we can live better together. So who's my pool of people now that might give us money? It's kind of everybody. But also, when the pool is so large, how do you get that so what? How do you get that why? How can I get people to part with their money? Because fundamentally, the idea of home and connections to home, and whether you have one or not, is a universal concept. And actually, for those who are in the room are fundraisers, have probably at some point learnt the Russo's fundraising circles, who's closest to the cause, etc. Well, who's close to home and the idea of home? It was everybody. So it's quite challenging. So as part of the senior management team, I work really closely on this idea of rebranding and the idea of creation of our vision. And constantly, I think I drove everyone else mad, but sort of saying, so what, why, all the time. And actually for me, fundraising comes right back to that brand, right back to why the museum or the institution exists, why it's important. Because if the museum or the institution doesn't have a really, really clear idea of what that is. And because you're important, or because you're big, or because you're popular, or because you've got some really great paintings isn't enough. What is the reason that you need to get someone to part with their money, and that in this very, very difficult climate? So we're saying we want to encourage everyone to live better together. That became our why. But I felt really strongly as an institution we had to do much more than just shine a light on some of the issues that we're all concerned with. We should actually try and bring about some societal change. And it led me to really think about architecture and design and how as professions and as institutions they try to bring about change. When actually the art world can often reflect and represent, but not actually necessarily change. So while we're going through these motions as a museum, we're seeing institutions like the Natural History Museum in London declare a climate emergency. We're actually seeing museums for the first time shift. We saw the International Museums Convention try to come up with a new definition of what the museum should be and how a museum in an institution should be a focus for social change and social justice. At the same time, I'm talking to my local communities of businesses and individuals, and I'm asking what's important to them. And it's that idea. It's about making the world a better place in some way, and how as an institution we can help them to do that. So we came up with a concept called Campaign for Change, and we decided that we would do really in-depth 2-year projects over the course, and this would be across the disciplines of the museum. This would involve really closely our brand team, our press team, our education team, our curatorial team, festivals and programming teams, and obviously fundraising and development, and actually, in fact, retail as well. And we would work with other people who are directly trying to bring about social change in a completely symbiotic partnership. Now, that sounds, I hope, all of you think, a great idea. How do you go and get those partners? Because I felt really strongly that as the Museum of the Home, it wasn't our place to decide what was the really big important issue. And therefore, if we couldn't decide what the really important issue was, how can we decide what the outcome should be, the change that needed to be effected? So I ended up going out to, we had a vague idea of the area. So we knew we were interested in homelessness and mental health were the 2 starting points. So I spent 18 months doing other things as well, but going out and speaking to other charities saying, do you want to partner with us on this thing, this idea? I don't really know what the idea is, and I don't really know what the outcome is, and I don't really know what the journey is to get there, but do you want to do it with me? Which is those of you who have been fundraisers and gone out to companies, it's quite a difficult ask, because I often got, I'm sorry, is this a corporate partnership? Is it 50,000 or more, or is it more? Do you want the regional office or the local office? And it at times was quite challenging. Eventually, I came across a collection of charities called the London Homeless Collective, and they're 25 charities that across the UK, national charities, that some of you may have heard of, like Shelter and Centrepoint and Crisis, so major multi-million-pound national charities, and also smaller local ones. And they had a mission to really try and tackle the issue of female hidden homelessness. And I said to them, this is really interesting, I don't know much about this. And they said, well, that's the point, no one does. So we began to discuss what their needs as an organisation were. And they needed coherency, they needed neutrality of spaces, and they needed a voice. Homeless charities, and I don't know much about the sector in France, but I'm imagining it's the same, use very similar images. The media picks up on similar images of homelessness. It's generally in the UK, it's older men with dependency issues, sleeping on cardboard in doorways. The issue in the UK, and I'm imagining it's the same in France, the much more significant issue is the homelessness that we don't see. And in the UK, it is in excess of 300,000 that we know about, women and their children living on sofas and in temporary accommodation in hostels. But the media doesn't show those pictures. It's really hard to show those pictures. And the charities don't show those pictures and can't share those stories as readily. So actually this whole important social mission is being missed. If you care about an issue as a charity, you often talk to the converted all the time. You use similar messaging and you talk to people who already care. Where a museum or institution can make a difference, they felt, was by telling new stories to new audiences in new ways. So actually using the museum setting and the museum's channels to get across new stories in really exciting and interesting ways. So that's happening, and that is feeding into our education program, our exhibition content, our outreach, our festivals. Then I've got my fundraising hat on, running the development team. And we've got this other problem of this massive universal concept of home and where our pool of people. And we've come off the back of an £18 million capital campaign to reopen the museum. We don't have a pool of funders. They've all done the capital campaign and gone. We've come in as a new team. And we're looking at who is the audience that might care. And we know that our audience cares about the so what. They care about making a difference. And here we were as a museum saying, we're not just going to talk about these issues. We're actually going to move the dial. We're actually going to change things. So together with the London Homeless Collective, we set ourselves 4 ambitions, which were to raise significant awareness of this problem of hidden homelessness, to change perceptions, to move the idea of homelessness in people's minds from old men with addiction problems in doorways to working women with children in terrible conditions of temporary accommodation. We also wanted to support the first strategy to tackle the problem. It was a London-based strategy involving the government, the local authorities, housing commissions, women with lived experience, and charities. And we also wanted to support the opening of, believe it or not, the first 24-hour drop-in centre for women in London. So we were able to go to donors, cold donors, and say, we are going to achieve these 4 objectives in partnership with these 25 charities. The money you get will 100% go to delivering the campaign. That was 70% to the museum, unrestricted, to deliver our objectives of raising awareness, changing perceptions through our exhibition, our curatorial education programme and media. And 30% would go directly to the charities. It's my understanding, I don't know about France, but in the UK, it's the first time an arts or cultural institution have actually given their money, split donations money in that way. We had to change our legal articles to do it, of course, because it's not usual for charities to give money to other charities. And we're a year in. Again, for the individual donors, fundraisers in the room, we went to 200 cold women initially, totally cold to the museum, cold to the charities. We wrote to them and told them what we wanted to do. And we wanted them to be founding sisters. That was the kind of patronage side of it. We had a 20% take-up rate for the initial cold ask of giving major gifts. We've gone out to multiple audiences. I'll give you some stats. We're now a year in to the 2-year campaign. We've raised 70,000 to spend on the delivery of the objectives. The first 24-hour drop-in centre is open. The strategy is complete and will go to government and the housing authorities. It launched at the museum. We've given away enormous amounts of our space, our event space, to the museums, to their charities, for their own events, their own team building, their own all sorts of different events. We've held external exhibitions, internal exhibitions, 2 festivals, theatre workshops with people with lived experience. We've had digital and social content, which has led to over 200 social media impressions, 200 million social media impressions. One event last weekend led to 500 new mailing list subscribers to our lists, 2,000 new followers on Instagram, Facebook likes up 36%, activity on our own profile up 360%, 13 print media pieces with a 20 million reach. And it's now led to partnerships with people with lived experience. So we're actually working with homeless curators, and they will produce work which will go into a permanent hostel down on the south coast. So as an organisation, I'll wrap up, I'm guessing that's my time, we're collecting surveys from our visitors as well. But as a museum, as an organisation, what started off as a fundraising need, who on earth am I going to ask for money? And it started off as a branding need of what's our real core vision of the museum. And now we have these campaigns for change, in which we're working towards our next one now, which draw together our retail. So we have 2 artist limited edition products, a brooch and a print, that the money goes towards a project. So working with retail, we're working with our events business, we're working with our comms and media team, our learning team, our curatorial team, our festival programming team, and our developing team as one united front. And in terms of donors, we're working with companies, sponsors, individuals, low-level giving from £1, euro upwards to major gifts. So we're crossing the spectrum from a donor portfolio field, so we're hitting that mixed portfolio tick, but we're also working completely cross-departmentally across the museum. I'll stop.
Thank you so much for your very interesting initiative in the social sector. So after the social sector, we are going with the NFTs and the digital issues.
Yes. Merci Sarah, je vais parler en français. Si vous...
Thank you, Sarah. I'll be speaking in French. So I'm going to start by telling you the origin of our collection. Our founder, Jean-François Barcot, in January 2021, and he's an art collector. He loves going to museums, and he would love, like on his lunchtime, going to museums and looking at artwork. And he wasn't able to do it in January 2021 because it was the third wave of COVID in France. So it was very frustrating. And so then he ended up going on the internet to find things that he could see, artwork he could admire, but he didn't find much. So then he went on the NFT platforms and saw that things weren't curated at all, a mixed bag of quality, things without explanation. And also he saw that museums, mostly American museums, were selling artwork from their collections to be able to pay their staff. It's something in France that couldn't happen, but it could happen in more, say, Anglo-American countries. But in France, there was a huge drop in footfall in museums, and of course they were encountering a lot of difficulties. So he is from a field where we're helping companies in digital transformation, said there's something we could do for the museum. So he started looking at what was possible and got in touch with museum directors and curators on LinkedIn and did some cold calling and got in touch with the British Museum in the UK, of course, and started looking at how to get involved in NFTs. What could a museum do in the field? And so then very quickly, they managed to identify what could be done. There was supposed to be a physical exhibit at the British Museum in September 2021, an Okusai exhibition. So he decided from that exhibition to create digital twins of the artwork that was to be exhibited and be sold as NFTs. Now, I'm sure many of you know, we had a presentation just a few minutes ago by Dmitry Ozarkov, who talked about the Hermitage Museum to explain what NFTs are. So it's a way of certifying the property of say, a digital file or digital artwork that's on the blockchain. So the collection model then was created. So NFTs then are part of the digital. The digital version then is the actual collections of museums are digitalized and then they're certified on the blockchain. So then there are limited editions like lithographies, or you could have like 2, 10, or 100 editions, and then the price would depend on the rarity of the pieces. And this way you could develop equity for the museum because part of the sale, the proceeds from the NFT sales then go to the museum. So people buy NFTs, and in a way they're becoming patrons of the museum. But that wasn't the initial goal of the British Museum. They were to reach a broader audience that was complementary with the people coming into the museums. Because today, museums, what we observe, our population tends to be more feminine, 50-ish years old, whereas people on the platforms come from over 250 different countries, younger, 35 to 40, and that produces a more complementary community to people who come physically into museums. So Our first exhibition lasted 4 months, and that coincided with the physical exhibition. There were 100 pieces exhibited in the British Museum and 100 that were not, right, that were just online. So they're part of the British Museum collection were not exhibited there, but they were exhibited online. So this allowed for the exhibition of other pieces that were not in the exhibition physically. And there was a pop-up store at the museum where people could could scan the code and go on the website of the collection. They could buy an NFT. So this initial exhibition went really well. It was a seven-digit in terms of sales. We don't give out the exact amount, but it was quite substantial for the museum. So the British Museum was very happy. And then following that, we held a second exhibition. There wasn't a physical exhibition at all. It was William Turner's watercolors, and these were exhibited and physically, they're only 2 weeks per year in February only, and they weren't exhibited this year physically, but we were able to create a collection of NFTs based on these watercolors, which were then put up for sale on the platform. So, okay, what else can I say? And what's great on our platform is that, if you've already tried buying, say, cryptocurrency or creating a crypto wallet, it can be complicated. Whereas on our platform, we've created a user experience that's very simple. You can buy with a simple credit card, and it's as simple as buying a book on, say, Fnac.com or Amazon.com. So you can see, 50% of the people buy with credit card, in fact. So it's just extremely simple. And this allows us to draw in a lot of people. And we do consider that people, for us, the people who buy NFTs, they're new patrons of the art. So the most expensive NFT we sold, the most iconic piece, was the Kusai's Great Wave at 55,000 euros, which brought in substantial revenues for the museum. And after that, well, people, in fact, who spend increasing amounts of money. Well, we're going to treat them like patrons. So digitally, we're going to bring them in physically. Hopefully, we're going to offer them to treat them the same way we do actual patrons. Maybe take them to dinner or private exhibition, or talking with one of our curators or something like that. So people who buy NFTs, they're not just buying an image, right? They're interested in the museum. They care about the museum. So they're allowing culture to continue thanks to technology. So we will get in touch with them.
MASHA, can I ask you, because you're talking about the example of the British Museum, do you have relationship with the French museums, and aren't there some legal adjustments with regards to what is managing our national collections? It's a very good question. Thank you, Sarah. Yes, indeed, we are talking with a lot of French museums, and indeed, there are some questions and some blocking, and including legal questions that we need to handle. Of course, we're also working a lot with lawyers on these issues. Today, we haven't found anything that really blocks this. Of course, it's maybe a little bit more complicated than is the case in the UK or the US, but nothing is really blocking. And if it's well done, it can absolutely happen, and we really hope that it's going to happen this year.
For your very capturing lectures. What was very interesting in my point of view is the way that fundraising is not only about financial issues, but you all underline how it was great for to wider audiences, to fulfill the mission, the social mission of the museums, and I think it's something great to see. That how cultural and social mission is not the contrary of financial issues. I would like to ask you just one question because time is going by, and to what extent your different initiatives are seen or are accepted by the scientific team in your several institutions? Is that well accepted, understood?
Effectivement, comme vous le disiez, Sarah.
Indeed, as you were saying, Sarah, what you've all shed light on is that we work well beyond the fundraising, and when we position this with partners in the broader missions of the museums, it's an issue. This issue is dwindling because we don't feel like we're there to serve the development of the resources of the museum. We're helping them to fulfill their purpose and find new patrons. And this is how we've supported them in the idea of doing these exhibitions outside the walls and by working with them very closely on these projects. There's no resistance from our side, but we are also doing an educational work with our teams to show that we're not there to serve the interests of the corporations inside the museum, but serving the interests of the museum. At the start, there's always some resistance, but when we create a climate of trust internally around these projects, and when we decorrelate this from a transactional relationship with a company, within Concluence, everything went well.
Well, just that I made it sound probably easier than it actually was in reality from the beginning. I mean, fundraisers in the UK, the museum sector, are usually not the most popular. And there usually is a bit of friction between curators or the creative side and the fundraising side, because we're all sort of just mercenary money people, asking people for money all the time and making curators give talks and things. And, it's not usually that harmonious. And certainly I didn't come up with this idea and everyone immediately say, well, that's a great idea, let's all get on board. And there was some initial hesitation, I think, to the idea, because the idea seemed to originate from the fundraising department. So it was seen for a little while as a fundraising idea. So it did take a little while to bed in and everyone to kind of realize, actually, that if we all got on board, that this was going to be a really exciting journey. We did onboarding, we did workshops, we brought people from the charity to come and talk to the teams to actually help them really understand. Because I think some people internally maybe thought, well, why are we actually helping them? Why do they want to be involved with us? But to hear from the charitable side say, we're so busy delivering our social change, we don't have time to think about our brand and our stories and our press, and you're doing all this amazing stuff for us, or you're providing this for us, you're giving us all these extra difference, exposure, you're doing the work that we would all love to be doing and just can't. So for everyone internally at the museum to hear from the charity, I think was really important. We've just done a sponsored walk for the charities, different departments coming together, volunteers, Sonia, the director, who's speaking later about the museum, so all come back. So it wasn't an idea that we sprung and everyone said, yes, we can all see it. It was quite difficult to visualize for most people because it was a completely unique way of working, and we are still the only organisation working in this way. So generally with change, it takes a bit of time. But when people start to see physical manifestations of the project, or they begin to see change and they begin to see how it can work in their area, people are always scared of change because they don't know how it applies to them. They don't know how they can get on board. But when you break that down and you start to sort of see and visualize and experience, I would say now we're all really on board. And the big thing we're doing for the next campaign is to bring everyone in the whole team, so front of house and all the different departments are already feeding into ideas as to what the partnership will be for our next campaign for change. The fact that everyone's involved in it's really exciting.
Thank you. And you, MASHA, do you have a word to how you collaborate with the curators?
Sure. For us, it's key to collaboration with curators, because what I haven't mentioned when I presented La Collection is we are a curated platform, so we will not show any collectibles or any artworks which has nothing to do one with the other. So for us, curation and relationship with scientifics is really key. So it's very important, and the British Museum was very much on board. So we worked with people in the British Museum who project managed with curators internally with the British Museum who were on board with this, because otherwise we could not produce the quality content actually. And they were very specific about how we talk about art, how we present it, how we describe it. Because when you go on a platform, actually for each artwork which is shown as NFT, you will see the how it was created, in which context, etc. So we conceptualize it. And what is one of our goals and the benefits also to create NFTs is we can create also exhibitions which cannot be otherwise shown. For example, if we work with several museums actually and create an exhibition trans-museum, something which could not be done otherwise because it's very expensive, because it's very ecologically impactful, etc. And for that, again, like the alignment with the curators internally is really key to create curated and quality content.
Okay, thank you. Gaële?
Oui, moi je dirais.
I would say that for the Centre Pompidou, the question is very specific. There's various ways that we could answer this. There's a multiplication of the number of projects over the past several years, whether these are contemporaneous or more multidisciplinary, and then you have the curators and the managers are entrepreneurs of the success of their projects. So the job of the fundraiser has spread out, if you will. So each project owner is in charge of their project. Even if we try to work together, there's a culture that was created with more or less collective efficiency, but there's a real evolution of this. The second aspect is a point that I was not able to discuss when I spoke. It's what we do in terms of exposure of our brand internationally and of transferring our expertise and also supporting what we can have with international institutions and actors of the private field. We will be working with promoters and territorial groups that we support with our expertise or not. So these are original models, and I think that these are more resources than fundraising. I think that it also contributes a certain degree of pride. It is the know-how that is being exported, the name of the place that is being monetized, if you will, and the mobilization can happen with a certain degree of tension because it's supplemental projects, but there's a certain degree of pride in terms of the métier of the brand and of a certain know-how that is very much desired. We're very much approached for this know-how, and I think that the curators and the programmers are proud of this. Thank you for answering us on this aspect of your name, and I think it is key for this type of project. So maybe we have time for a few questions in the room. Does anyone want to ask questions to our panel today? We were that clear? Thank you all for your attention. And I wish you all a delightful day. And I want to really thank the participants for having come from far away or not as far away in this very busy period. Thank you so much.